Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathleen Gibson, the Early Childhood Specialist here at PTSI. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this session of Therapist Thursdays. We have set aside time near the end of the presentation to go over any questions you may have, and you can submit your questions through the chat box located in the controls near the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions that are personal in nature, we will follow up over email, and we will also share a copy of this presentation and any additional resources with everyone afterwards. Today, I'd like to welcome Amanda Randall with us. Dr. Randall is an educator, a board certified behavior analyst, or BCBA, as you may have also heard it called, and a mom who has served in various educational and vocational capacities: teacher, program coordinator for children's services, in-home service provider, and director for an adult community inclusion program. Amanda is currently the Assistant Co-Director at the Virginia Department of Education's Training and Technical Assistance Center at James Madison University, and she is a very proud mom of two very active toddlers. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you guys today. Not only because I love talking about behavior as a behavior analyst, but today I get to talk about my two little ones. So let's get started. So when we think about supporting positive behaviors, the thing I always tell people is remember that they're watching everything that we do. This is my soon-to-be 3-year-old. She turns 3 next week. After I went to the bathroom for a minute, I came back. She's sitting in my desk doing exactly what I do, typing on one computer and looking at my laptop with my glasses on. So just thinking about everything that we're doing, the mood that we're in, everything that we're doing in our home, our routines, our activities, our expressions, our words, our young kids are watching us, and they will start to demonstrate those behaviors and display those based on watching us, especially right now when they're home with us a lot more than they may typically be home with us. All behavior has communication. So any behavior, a tantrum, crying, a lot of times we're thinking like, why is he doing that? Or you're doing that for no reason. My husband will say that all the time. Why are you doing that? You don't have a need to cry right now. Why are you crying? And it's like, they're crying for a reason, but it's us trying to figure out what's the reason. It may not be something that we can control. So it may be that their tantrum or their behavior is something that they're just going to have to work through for the moment, or it may be something that we can prevent in the future, or we can change up some of the ways we respond to their behavior so that they don't have those same behaviors in the future. The one thing I do want you guys to know is that even as a behavior analyst, my kids right here in my home have behaviors. That's what they do. That's their way of learning to express themselves. Especially for some of the little, really small kids, they're still trying to learn their language. And so I used to tell my husband all the time, my kids having behavior for me as behavior analyst is like, yes, they're trying to communicate with me. So just think about all of their different behaviors as them trying to communicate. Us as parents have to figure out, what are they trying to communicate? So I literally think they would take my BCBA if I didn't have this slide. So I have to go through it really fast with you guys. So all behavior is communication, but why is the behavior happening? So there's only 4 reasons behavior happen. And I know that people are thinking, no, there's more than that, but it's not. Like, so either it's escape, they're trying to get out of doing something, they don't enjoy something. Escape is what we see a lot with some of our kids around eating. They don't want to eat, so they start having behaviors. My son has this new thing about standing up in the chair singing while he's trying to eat, because he is a kid who hates mealtime. That's just, unless it's Doritos or a popsicle or some Skittles, he doesn't want anything else on his plate, really. He's really skinny too. Attention. Young children need a lot of attention. And so a lot of their behaviors will either come from sometimes us giving them too much attention and they just need a little space. So they're trying to escape our attention, or them just needing our attention. A lot of times you'll see these behaviors in the car when they're a little bored in the back seat and they're just, why? What are you doing? Where are we going? Are we there yet? All these questions sometimes our attention. Also, when they're watching shows, or they may be watching an iPad or doing some things that we think they should be able to do them independently, and then we start to see some behaviors. And it could be that they just need a little bit of attention, a little bit of reinforcement, so that they can keep sitting there alone while you try to get something else done. An activity or object. This picture right here is classic to me because these are my two kids right now. My daughter goes and grabs a toy, and all of a sudden it's my son's favorite toy. So them wanting an activity or an object, wanting to go outside, wanting to go play, wanting to play with the iPad. Usually it's over some toy that one of them found in the bottom of the toy bin and neither of them have seen in like a year. But now they're fighting over it. So you see behaviors, you see them hitting each other or tantruming or throwing things. So, and then the last reason that behavior happens is sensory. And sensory is sometimes the hardest for us to get because for our younger kids, like I said before, sometimes their communication may not be that clear. They may not be the most accurate communicators of their feelings, how their body feels. But sensory, you can think of that as, for my son, his allergies. He has really bad allergies. And I can tell that I forgot to give him his allergy medicine this morning because by midday, he's like all over the place. And I know it's because maybe his head hurts or his nose might be about to bleed, different things like that. So sensory can be some of the medical things, but also some of the things that we're doing in the environment. One of the things that I know some people like to do is play music and have the TV running in the background. My mom was here last week and she likes to have the news running 24 hours in the background, and it drives me crazy because I am a very sensory person. Like I get sensory overload, and so I think by default I'm a little more in tune to my kids not having too much sensory things going on. And so just taking time to take in what's going on in your environment and making sure they're not too sensory, they don't have too many sensory things going on in their environment. They can't focus on you talking to them or an activity that you've given to them. On the flip side, also them getting sensory input, going out for walks, running. I give my kids really deep pressure hugs, and they used to think it was like funny, but my son knows now, like sometimes he's like, Mommy, I just need a really tight squeeze, because sometimes they just need some deep sensory. I also rub their feet a lot, rub their hands a lot, different types of things just to give them a little bit of sensory input. So those are the 4 reasons that behavior happen. If you can think about your kids' behavior as we go through this presentation and just try to think, are those some of the things they're looking for? Are they trying to get out of something? Do they need my attention? Are they trying to get access to an object? Or do they need a little more sensory or a little less sensory? So now we'll get into play. And I came up with this because I think that's what I have to keep reminding myself. We've been at home since March now. I've been trying to work from home. My kids have been trying to learn, play, engage from home. And the thing that I have to keep remembering is that I have to take time to play with them and enjoy them. At their age right now, they learn the most through play. And so I have to continue to remember that and keep that at the forefront of my brain, but also remember they're not getting to play with all their peers and friends like they used to get to play in the past. So I thought this was just a great word. So play, I think we need to emphasize to prevent problem behavior. We emphasize play, emphasize listening, attention, and you as a parent, as an educator, whatever role you play, making sure that you are taking care of yourself, because we're only good to our children if we're good to ourselves. So we'll start with the P. And I was excited putting this picture together, this presentation together, because if you guys are anything like me, I have 1,000 pictures in this phone, and half of them I'm like, why did I take that? But I took it for this presentation. So here we go. You'll get to see a ton of pictures of my children. And do not judge my home, because these are shots I hadn't planned for a presentation, and my home might not be clean. So play. Play with them, be playful with your instructions and directions. I know a lot of times we feel like our kids should know our tone, know who we are, but no, we're not like when we mean business, but sometimes we just need to play and engage with them, even with cleaning. If you look at the picture of my daughter putting the dishes away, that's one of her new chores that she has to do. I just pull out the spoons and forks. She gets on her stool. You see she had her ice cream in her hand yesterday, which was a little scary. You see it drip into one of the trays, but we put it together. We play while we're doing it. I'm like, you know, we play a sing song. We do different types of things and make it so that it's fun for her. It's one of her chores, but she feels like it's fun. We take breaks to play. There was one day during this quarantine where it was raining. I think it had rained all week that week, and my kids were just feeling as trapped inside as I was feeling. And so I'm just like, all right, raincoats, go outside, take a break and play. They enjoy it. We may think it's like too cold, too hot, but they need time to be outside and just play. So make sure we take breaks to play. Teaching them through play. Anytime you have an opportunity to count, say their ABCs. When we take walks, we read all the stop signs. We talk about the colors. So when you're playing, find ways to just engage with them and just challenge them a little bit throughout that play. And keeping their play space organized. That's an activity that they can do, and they learn to take pride in their play space. My son told a friend of mine a couple months ago when they were going to come over, he said to her, every time you and your kids come over, you guys mess up our playroom and then we have to clean it. And I'm like, Jax, don't say that. It's true. Don't say that. But they begin to take pride in keeping their play space clean, but also it makes it so they know what they have to play with. We have ours set up, you know, in whatever way we have it set up. But for them, they know where things are, which makes it more engaging, more interactive for them. And be flexible with your routines. I think we all need routines. I can't stress that enough. That's a constant fight in my house right now. I think it was last week, my husband was like, but isn't it summer? Why do we have routines in summer? I'm like, because they are 3 and 5. They have to have routines. Children appreciate routines. They appreciate knowing we get up each morning, we have breakfast, we get dressed. Getting dressed was something we didn't do that first week, so we've made a habit every day of getting dressed now. And we just take a walk. We take a walk around our neighborhood. A couple of times when it was raining so much, we took laps around the house. Just try to find a way to get that physical exercise that they need. But then we go on and we do different things throughout the day. But my kids know their routine. It also makes it easier when you say it's quiet time or nap time, that they know they've done something prior to nap time or quiet time. Next is listen. And this is the hardest thing for me sometimes when my kids go on and on and on and on. You see my 3-year-old right there. This is her telling me to stop and take a picture of her. I'm like, okay, she loves for me to take a picture of her. So I did. And she had a prayer that she wanted to say. So I listened to her say her prayer. The other thing is to listen to their behaviors and their communication. And stop for a minute when they're talking, because their little brains are preparing for when they get older. So if we don't stop and listen to them now, when they're teenagers or when they go to school next year, they're not going to think that we have time to stop and listen. So we're trying to also create healthy habits for communication and interacting with them as they get older. So I prime my children a lot with some of the language I want to hear. I want, I need, I'm crying because are some of the common language in my house, because they're so caught up in their behaviors when they're having them that they don't have the language. So I wanted to show you guys a quick video of my son yesterday and his tantrum that he was having. I was upstairs trying to work. I was on a web call, and all I could hear was him downstairs screaming because he woke up from his nap. So I'll let you listen. It's a short video.
Crying because?
I'm crying because
Why are you crying? I don't understand. Tell me what's going on. Why are you crying, Jax? You don't know why you're crying? Why were you sitting down there screaming and crying while I'm trying to have my meeting?
Because no one was here with me.
Oh, you thought you were home alone? What? You know I wouldn't leave you home alone, right?
So that's just an example of me trying to help him process the language and just sort of help him say, this is why I'm crying, because believe it or not, prior to this video, he was literally screaming and just out of control. And then listen to what they're hearing. And by that, I mean, protect their ears and their eyes. What are they watching on TV? When other people are in your home, what are they watching? Because even though something's animated, or we may not think that it's something that they're paying attention to, like I said before, they're watching everything, they're listening to everything. And some of these behaviors that you see in the future may come from some of the things they've experienced or seen on TV or from other people who are in your home. So the A for attention. I've already talked about reducing house noise, giving them frequent positive attention. If you can see in this video, in this picture, my son is all boy. This is how I caught him the other day, as he says, Mommy, where's the J on the refrigerator? So he's trying to spell his name. And so I was giving him attention, but I'm like, you have to get down because my stomach hurts because you may fall. But as you can see, he was on the refrigerator trying to write out words. He's really into learning how to spell right now. And so I'm washing dishes, but I'm also trying to give him attention for doing that because I'm happy that he's excited about learning. So I'm trying to ignore some of the problem behaviors when they're happening, if they're ignorable. Like I'm not saying allow them to hurt themselves, injure themselves or others, but try to make sure that like some of the smaller behaviors, you're not yelling or giving them attention for everything. Because every time you say, stop, don't do that, why are you doing all those things, you think you're giving them punishment, but for them, that's still attention. The other picture is my daughter. Sometimes she just needs some alone time with me. I had some work to do, but I told her, you come in here with me while Mommy works and you can sit there and read your book. And so remembering that sometimes if you have multiple children, they may need some just one-on-one time with just you. I could be doing better with giving her that one-to-one time where it's just she and I engaging in something, playing or things like that. But I had a deadline right then. So the best that I could do is have her in the space with me. And she did appreciate it despite the look on her face. The last letter of the play is U. Take Mommy and Daddy breaks. I forced my husband to play Uno the other night because we just hadn't taken time for each other. Right now we don't have childcare, so there's no time for us to just get out. We took laps around the house one day. We walked down the street with the baby monitors while the kids were sleeping for nap. I take long showers when I get a chance to shower. Just take a second to breathe and just take care of yourself. I also, sometimes with my friends, we go out and social distance. We wouldn't have Impossible Burgers one day because we all love those. But just making sure you're taking a little time for yourself and saying no to some of the external requests. We all have other family members, but right now I feel like it's time that we may have to say no to some unnecessary requests from people outside of our home as much as possible. Nap and quiet time. Those are so important for my sanity, your sanity, and your kid's sanity. My son, who's turning 5, is starting to grow out of naps a little bit. So I put him a little corner in his room that he can just play it. And we're getting better at it because he knows that if you're not going to nap, you have to at least stay in your room until 3 o'clock. And he can tell the time for 3 o'clock now. He has to stay in his room and just do something quiet to himself because I don't want him to bother his little sister who actually needs to take a nap. So just making sure that when they have downtime, you just take a minute and breathe and have some downtime as well. Because again, our mood and everything feeds back into our ability to just, I don't want to say tolerate, but that's the word, tolerate some of their behaviors. Because when we're tired and we're exhausted, some of the small things that they do can push us over the edge. So the why is just as important as the P in play. So just remembering at all times that we set the mood, we set the expectations, and we have to stay encouraged. So setting the mood is just trying to help set them up for positive routines, help them smile every day, greeting them with smiles, just loving them and helping them to feel positive, setting high expectations. You see my kids here have turned their playroom upside down, literally, because they're standing on the table that we usually work at. But they know when it's time to work that we're going to sit down and we're going to do work. And so just making sure that you have clear expectations for what they should and shouldn't be doing. And then just staying encouraged. I know that there's times, especially if you have multiple children or if you have a child with like reoccurring problem behaviors, we've seen times where my son especially has really frequent problem behaviors. And so we stay encouraged through that, stay consistent with him, and keep our expectations high. And a lot of times he'll get through those. He always gets through them, actually. But just staying the course and knowing that tomorrow things could be different. And yeah, so that's all. I wanted to show this picture because I wanted to point out to you guys that I know what we're going through. I know that there are hard times, and sometimes we have these expectations that we're going to have this perfect, picture perfect day, and it goes to all crap. But the next day comes, and you guys will make it through it. That's it.
Thank you, Amanda. One thing I like to say is I like to remind if my kids are being, we'll call them challenging because my children are the same age as you, as Amanda, or your children, excuse me. And I like to remind them that if they're having meltdowns and they're upset, it's okay to have a bad day.
Yes.
We all have bad days, and I can't speak for everyone, but you know, I've probably said some things or acted out and done some things if I'm frustrated or tired as well, right? So, just going to throw that out there. So we do have a couple of questions. One is, I have a toddler, 29 months. I'm curious how to handle or react to clumsiness. It's so hard to tell if constantly making spills or throwing the dog bowl is for attention or if he's really just being clumsy. And I never know the right way to react.
Well, I think one of the ways to look at it is to see what happens after that. So if you look at the behaviors, so for instance, dumping the dog bowl over, does the child look at you right after, or do they just keep going about their business like, oops, that was a mistake? That's how you can tell if it's for attention. If they look at you directly afterwards, or they try to, it's right as a response to you telling them to do something and then they do it, then that's probably definitely for attention. Clumsiness, I don't know. My son used to wipe the table all the time. And so we did have these mats that, cups and plates that had the sticky stuff on the bottom that would prevent him. And then the other thing I started doing, because he figured out a way to lift those up, is just putting it directly on his tray when he was a toddler. We just put the food right on the tray. So I think just looking to see how they behave and interact with you right after the behavior happens will help to see if it's for attention or if it's actually accidental. I would probably lean toward just for attention. So how you react after it happens is going to be really important, either ignoring it or trying to prevent it at that age, so that they forget about some of those options.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. We have a couple more questions. One, how do we balance creativity and expression with not letting behavior get out of control?
Ooh, that's a good one. I feel like really you have to think about what you're trying to get them to be creative with. So for instance, yesterday we were making puppet animals, and my son got mad because I'm like, we have to cut a nose out. Your puppet doesn't have a nose. And he got mad at me, and then I'm like, okay, forget it. The puppet doesn't have to have a nose. It's a pretend poster. We made Wacky Wednesday animals. His animal's going to be wacky with no nose. And so sometimes it's picking our battles to figure out, is this something we actually need to have a battle over? When you think about creativity, as far as I know my sister, she's a stickler for matching clothes. And it annoys her that my son will come out in whatever, because I'm like, that is one battle that middle school, high school straighten out for him. They'll help him figure out that he doesn't match his clothes, because right now I'm not going to have that battle with the 5-year-old and set our day up to be horrible. If it's things where they're destroying property, like writing on the walls or things like that type of creativity, I'd say those are behaviors you try to stop. And I'm not opposed. I'm a behavior analyst, and I will say, I put my kids in timeout. I'm consistent with it. They know when timeout is going to happen. I know some people are opposed to punishment. I can't say I'm opposed to punishment, because a timeout, when used consistently and effectively, it works. It gives them a moment to sit down and think and take a breath. And if you're consistent with it, they know it's a consequence that's available to them when they misbehave. Did I answer that question?
I think you answered that question, but I didn't ask the questions.
Yeah, I can't see
Yeah.
anything in the chat, so I just want to make sure.
So, no, absolutely. And I'll piggyback on your timeout. So we also do timeout in our home. And my three, first of all, my 3 and my 5-year-old are not big fans of timeout,
No.
but we're consistent. We put
Yep.
them, they have, we put them on the step. So we use steps, and I put them on the step, and I'm like, 2 minutes, no timeout. And I'm like, but they don't move, because they know if they move, I'm just going to pick them right back up and start the timer over again. So, but it's been efficient.
Yeah, and we also
for our household.
We also use, I use a count up, 1, 2, 3, and they know if we get to 3, a consequence is coming. Whatever they're doing, if they haven't stopped it, they're going to timeout. I try to give them a chance to, they learned in school, in preschool, that can I have 1 more minute? And so I do try to acknowledge that when you act appropriately, but if they're just like screaming and yelling at me and asking for 1 more minute, it's not going to happen.
Right. Absolutely. And then, but we have 2 more minutes. So because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we do have 1 more question. And if I didn't get to your question, I'll make sure we follow up with an email after the program. The last question that we'll talk about right now is, how can we determine what the function of the behavior is so we know how to handle it?
Oh, yes. Okay. So when you look at the function of behavior, it's exactly what happens after behavior, what you do or what they do. So I'll give you an example. I already gave you one for the function being attention. I'll give you the one for the function being escape. So right now with my son, we're working on writing his first and last name. I can guarantee you the minute I put his little whiteboard marker and the paper down for him to write his name, he starts tantruming. I don't like writing my last name. My last name is Arthur. Whose name is Random? All those things that he does are to escape out of doing the task. He also gets mad because his 3-year-old sister only has to write her first name. And so I know, because the minute I give him that activity, he engages in those behaviors and starts to have his little tantrum. That's an escape maintain behavior. That is an activity that I need him to do because he's going to kindergarten next year, God willing. And so I stick to it. I'm like, okay, I'll give you 1 minute to calm down. I talk him through it. I help him through it. Sometimes I hand over hand with him. So looking at what happens right after that behavior and right before that behavior will let you know if it's attention, escape, sensory, or they're trying to get access to an object. If they're trying to get access to an object, I always try to help my kids use an appropriate voice. So if they're having a tantrum or screaming, I'm like, okay, let's try this again. You stop, take a deep breath, and say, may I have, I want, so that they have the language to say what they want. And if they've had a tantrum to the point where they're like flailing and kicking and screaming and yelling, they don't get it. They don't get access to it, because what we don't want to do is reinforce that type of behavior, giving them access to the item that they're asking for. There's a second part to that question, but I can't remember.
No, that was it.
Okay.
That was it. You got it. Excellent. All right. Well, in the respect of all of our time, I just want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Amanda, thank you for presenting. We hope that you'll join us next Therapist Thursday, when we'll be discussing mindfulness, emotional awareness, and reducing anxiety, followed up the next week with a fun session specifically for the kids and parents to learn mindfulness techniques themselves. Wishing you all a happy, healthy week.
Bye. Thank you.